Yeah, we're live. It is 7:02, and I'm here live. Tonight we're going to talk about the Dodge 2.2 liter turbo motor, and I got a list right here. Boom. I'm going to go over all the things that I want to test, because before I run any of these tests on any of the engine families, especially other guys' stuff, which is really cool, which this Dodge 2.2 liter definitely fits into the other guys' category. Before I do that, I'd like to make a list and figure out, hey, here are the things that I'd like to get done. Here's what I'd like to test. Here are the different things. That way I can kind of prep and decide, okay, if I want to actually test all of those things, what do I need to get in order to make that happen? So we can do some pre-gaming, and I like to organize that beforehand. So do I need valve springs? Do I need to order a camshaft? Do I need to order an intake manifold or an exhaust manifold? How many, because it's a turbo motor, how many different turbos do I need to have? You know, what kind of intercoolers do I want to test? All of that stuff. So if I go through beforehand and make a list, Tim's in the house. What's up? Robert's here. If I go through and make a list ahead of time, then I go, okay, look, here are the problems I'm going to run across. Obviously, if I want to run a camshaft, I have to have valve springs. If I want to take the head off and port the head, I'm going to need head bolts or head studs, and obviously a new gasket. So all of these things, you know, like if I figure out what I'm going to do to the motor as I'm tearing it apart in my mind, I go, oh, look, I'm going to need that. This thing is probably going to break. For instance, the 4200 head bolts we're definitely going to break those. And in my case, I'm going to break all of them, apparently. So the 2.2 liter is no different. Because this motor came from the wrecking yard, I'll give you a perfectly good example. While I'm making my list, the first thing is I want to clean the engine, which we did. And now we want to check if this thing is going to run. What I'm going to do is put it up on a stand, and I'm going to attach the starter. We're going to attach a battery to the starter. I'm going to short it out. We're going to rotate this thing over, and maybe I'll do a video on that. But I'm going to do it so that I can do a cranking compression test, let's say. So I can find out if I have no idea if this thing even runs. I'm assuming that the motor ran and that it caught fire, which is why it came in, because somebody didn't want to fix it. And I'm hoping that that's the case. I'm hoping we had a good motor that had an unfortunate thing happen to it. And then when there was a fire, it burned the harness on that side, which we don't care about anyway. We would put new stuff on. And then even the sensors that are in there, I don't necessarily care about. All we need is a mechanical linkage for the throttle body, which is there. And then we usually put in our own coolant temp sensor and or air temp sensor if we want to do that. But all that's and we put in our own air fuel meter for the dyno. So all that stuff is very simple things. We can make all of that happen. So what I'm hoping is that thing is good. But before I know that, we can put it on a stand. I can crank it over. I can go, hey, look, the compression is all even. I'm not expecting a lot of compression, given these things were only about 8.2 to 1, I think. And made a whopping 142 horsepower. But I'm really excited about this motor and that I got this particular one. Now I know everyone's saying, oh, just like they're saying with the Clevelands and the 4200s and the Barra now, you know, oh, you got the wrong one. You needed to get this one because it's got the best rods, or it's got the best head, or it's originally a turbo motor, all of these things. You know, with the 2.2, you need the common block. And ideally, if I was picking any of them, I would get a 2.5 common block, because no matter what anybody says, a 2.5 is better than a 2.2 because it's bigger. So it will make more torque. It'll make the turbo much more responsive and give you more leeway. For me, what I would be thinking is that it gives me more leeway to put a bigger turbo on, which can ultimately make more power. But because it's a 2.5, compared to a 2.2, it will spool the turbo up better because it'll make more low-speed power. So, and it'll also, same thing with the camshaft and the intake manifold and all that stuff. The bigger motor will give us some leeway in there. So if I was choosing one, I would probably choose a common block 2.5 liter. And then everybody's saying, yeah, you need to do a 4-valve upgrade on it. You need to do all of this stuff. Okay, all of that's fantastic. And I'll go over the list of all the things I'm going to do. But the reason I like this 84 version is because I'm starting out at the beginning. And when I decided, and I went off down the rabbit hole and started looking at all the 2.2 stuff and said, I really want to find one of these. I really want to run one of these. I really want to have one of these. And that's the first thing I decided when I was doing that. I'm like, okay, yeah, it's neat to have a Spirit RT, have a double overhead cam, have a turbocharged one, intercooled, and all that stuff. All that's great. And we know that I don't want 142 horsepower. I want the 225. All that's great. But if I'm going to start and do this as a procedure and a step-by-step thing to show people what works and what doesn't work, we want to start out at the beginning. And there's no more there's no more beginning than this 142 horse non-intercooled, non-computer controlled wastegate. This is the bare bones, the draw through throttle body, for the turbo. And this is like bare bones as it gets. And I want to start here, and then we can go up from there, because a lot of back in the day, and even now, it's a very common upgrade for guys to take the T1 deal, especially this draw through, and put an intercooler on it. Well, if you're going to put an intercooler on it, a lot of guys do the T2 stuff. You would put a better intake manifold on it. You'd put the blow through throttle body section on it. You'd put the intercooler on it. You do all the things to make it better. And if we start out at the beginning, all we can do is go up and up and up in stages and make it better and better and better. So it will be cool. I'll be curious to see what the thing, if I do a compression test and we indeed find that it's at least even and everything seems to be happy, and we can run it on the dyno, which will be good, and run it with a Holley. We'll probably run it as with a Holley HP setup, and that should work. If we do that, what I want to do, and I'll go through my list now of the testing that we want to get done, and I can get to you if you guys have questions. But obviously, the first thing I would want to do was we would want to run it stock. Now, I don't have a stock air box, which I kind of wish I would have got from this thing. And I think that it was there, but we didn't get it with the motor, because now the wrecking yard wants to charge you for everything that you add to it. They want to charge you for the starter and the alternator and everything. They want to charge you for the extra section of the downpipe, because they called that the exhaust, rather than if you cut it off at a certain amount, which we could have done, which I didn't do when I was there. Then they don't count it. So they have specific rules. The distributor counts as extra. The turbo counts as extra. So, it's all stuff that they're just trying to make more and more money. And that's part of the deal. But I didn't get the air intake. But what I will do is we will put some kind of air filter and hose on it, just so that it simulates that. And then we'll run a stock size exhaust. I still haven't measured the exhausts on there. It looks like they've sleeved up the exhaust size on it. So I want to check and see what it is. So if anybody knows, let me know what the original 2.2 downpipe was, what size it was. And then we'll run, I'll simulate some kind of muffler and exhaust so that we can run it as stock as I can. So to run it stock to begin with, we'll run it at 7 pounds. We'll run it with an air intake and exhaust as I described. We'll run it with just the wastegate, controlling the boost the way that it does. And then I'll also have to simulate some sort of factory timing and air fuel. So if anybody knows what that is, if somebody knows that these things run at, 15 degrees of total timing, or 20 or 21 or whatever the number is, if you know what that is, the guys that have run these things and can tell me at wide open throttle at 7 pounds of boost, just give me an idea what the timing curve is from the factory. I know it's going to be, because of knock sensors, it's going to be kind of fuel dependent. And I do want to run different fuel levels. But the nice thing is we're not going to be relying on a knock sensor, and none of it is going to change unless we change it. So it won't self-compensate. It won't do any of that. So what I need to do is I want to run a baseline with the stock air fuel and timing and the stock boost level and the stock exhaust and stock intake, and start from there, and then go, okay, now one of the things I want to do obviously is a tune. So if you had, for instance, this would simulate if you had one of the Mopar computers or one of the other, programmed or programmable computers that would allow you to change the air fuel and timing. Now, what I'll do is we'll just change the air fuel and timing by itself. So we'll add timing, and if it's rich, if it's in the 10 to 1s or something, we'll lean it out, and those will improve it. And I'll still run it at 7 pounds. So I want to show just what the tune does. And then obviously we'll add boost, because if guy has a 2.2 liter turbo Dodge, that's what he's going to do. He's going to add boost. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So we will add boost to it. So we'll run it at, and to do that, I'm going to run it with a combination of race gas and pump gas, because we don't have a knock sensor hooked up to it. So I don't have the safety of the factory setup. So I'm not going to try to get away with what I can get away with on pump gas. I'll just tell you what happens when we run it at this air fuel and this timing and these different boost levels. And what I want to see is how much does the boost add? Now, if you have something that cuts that because the knock sensor is activated and you're trying to run it on 89 octane, then there's a limit to how far you can go up and boost anyway. So you shouldn't be doing that really. And I'm not going to do that. But I want to show what the effect of each pound of boost does. And we'll go up to maybe 15 pounds or something, which is kind of where most of these things would be running with modified computers and stuff. And along the way, obviously, as we go up and boost, we're going to monitor inlet air temperatures. So I'll be able to show you what that is as we go up and boost. Do we see a consistent gain in inlet air temperature as we go up with each pound or each 2 pounds of boost, let's say? Does it go up 10 degrees or 20 degrees or whatever the number is? Or does it go up 10 degrees and then only 8 degrees and then 30 degrees? You know, we'll be able to show all that, which will be interesting, especially in a non-intercooled environment, because that becomes a critical thing on a non-intercooled motor. And obviously, since it's a turbo motor, everyone raises the boost. But the other thing that you should think about immediately on any turbo motor is to put an intercooler on it. But what we'll do also, and because this is a draw-through setup, a draw-through throttle body, the throttle body is in front of the turbo, what I'll also do is, you know, when we go up in these boost ranges, I'll also monitor the vacuum between the throttle body and the turbo. So we'll be able to see, is that inlet system becoming a restriction? And we'll try other inlet systems. Lucky for me, because we're running a standalone management system, I don't need all of the stuff that's attached to the factory throttle body. It doesn't even have to be in that position. I can take off basically everything in front of the turbo, and I can run an adapter, and I could put a 90 millimeter, 102 millimeter LS throttle body on there if we want. So I can just do an adapter to go out to that. So we can put as big a throttle body as we want on that inlet system and maximize it and just show what effect that has. Does that change the power? The interesting thing is that on a turbo motor, and it's controlled by the wastegate. So, you know, if we have it set at 10 pounds, it's still only going to make 10 pounds. Where this might become more important is where we start seeing boost fall off. So if we were trying to max the turbo out, let's say that factory turbo will do 20 pounds, but it just starts struggling after that. If we put a bigger inlet on it, we may have the ability to go up in power delivery from that particular turbo if the inlet has become a restriction. So I want to try that. I want to try different size throttle bodies, different size inlets, and maybe also different kind of air filters. If we have different size cone filters and stuff, we can try that as well. The next thing I want to do, obviously, because it's a turbo motor, is we want to try different exhaust upgrades. So naturally, we'll do different size downpipes. So I was thinking we would run a 2-inch, a 2.5 inch, and a 3-inch downpipe off of the factory swing valve assembly. Now I want to know, and I think somebody mentioned it, is there another swing valve assembly that bolts to the back of that turbo that would have a bigger discharge opening? Because even if we have the tubing bigger than that opening, we're going to have to flare that out to put bigger tubing on it, which is, you know, that's always good. But then maybe that opening becomes the restriction. So if we can put a bigger opening back behind that, it might be that it flows enough already. But again, that'll be interesting to try, even with the factory turbo. So we'll try some different exhaust mods, and I definitely want to try that. And we'll try maybe a muffler and no muffler, and you know, on the aft side of the exhaust, and kind of see what's going on. Obviously, because this is a non-intercooled turbo, we're also going to have to try intercoolers. Now, I'll try both air-to-air and air-to-water, and we might try them both. This will give me an opportunity to try them both in a draw-through and a blow-through application for the throttle body. Honestly, I don't know that until we turn the boost up if there's going to be a big difference between those two. Like at 7 pounds, there may be no difference blowing through and drawing through this setup, because you know, that's not a lot of airflow, and there we may have restrictions elsewhere. And looking at that intake manifold, the intake manifold is just awful. So I can see why people would want to replace that and want to upgrade it, because there's definitely more power to be had from a manifold that has any kind of runner length in it. That manifold is you know, it's good for packaging, which is I'm sure why they chose that design, but it's not ideal from a power standpoint. So we'll do intercooled, non-intercooled. We'll also do an air-to-air, air-to-water. We'll do ice water. And then naturally, we'll also try E85. So we'll put E85 in the mix. And then along with the E85, we'll talk about how much more injector you need to run E85 and then what the benefits are. We're also going to try, after we go to E85, and we'll run, when we do that, when we run E85, we'll run it at different boost levels. So because we ran the boost up on the pump gas race gas mix, non-intercooled, we'll see what the E85 does, and maybe we'll run the E85 non-intercooled and then also run it intercooled, and then we'll turn the boost up. And so we can compare it at different levels and go, yeah, it wasn't worth very much at 7 pounds. Maybe it's worth more at 15. All of that stuff should come into play. Because we have a turbo motor with a factory turbo, one of the things we definitely should do on this application is do a turbo upgrade. So I have a couple of small turbos that I think would work for these. I have the stuff from Max Speeding. I have a GT3076 and a GT3582. I have 2 of each of those. So if we really wanted to get crazy, we could do that. But even just one each of those is more than enough. I know the GT3582 is going to be a 500 to 600 horsepower turbo. So that would be getting the outer edge of what an 8 valve could do. And it would be way beyond what this 8 valve could do because it's not modified at all. So we would have to think about on these also, and I'll get your guys' input on this. Should I do head studs and head gaskets? I kind of want to check the ring gap on this anyway. So if I'm going to do that, we may do head studs and head gaskets beforehand. And that way, when we do all this testing, I don't have to worry about hurting a head gasket. Because the other thing that's the possibility with this motor is that we don't have any idea, even if it leaks down okay, we don't know if it's on the verge of a head gasket going. We don't know if the thing's been overheated. We don't know a lot of stuff about it because it's just something that came from the wrecking yard. So maybe a little preemptive stuff is not a bad idea. At some point with the 85 and with an intercooler on this thing and maybe some kind of, because the other thing I want to, well, we'll get to the intake manifold. We might want to try higher boost levels. I just don't know how high on the boost we can go or how high I would feel comfortable going with this intake manifold. I just don't think it's very good. So that brings me to the next series of upgrades would be intake manifolds. We obviously wanted to do a T2 one so that we can bolt on the various different kinds of factory style intake manifolds on this and just see how well they do in terms of power. Now it would be hard to figure out how they do in terms of distribution because I don't have the ability to monitor the air fuel or the pressure in each one of the cylinders. So that it would be difficult to do that until we switch over to maybe testing some sort of tubular header in place of the factory exhaust manifold. But intake manifolds are definitely on the list. And then right after that, obviously we would want to test the factory exhaust manifold versus some kind of header, whether that's a log style header or a tubular one where we actually have some like exhaust primary length going to the turbo. And because we're doing it on an engine dyno, it all has to be packaged fairly uniquely for the chassis. But because we're running on an engine dyno, we can make the design of the header basically just fit however we want. So we have some freedom there for the design of the exhaust manifold to position the turbo, at least so that it looks cool. It could be up near the side of the manifold and figure out if that's worth any power compared to the stock exhaust manifold. And also check, it's not great to check response rate on an engine dyno, but it might be able to give us an idea on what's going on. And this would become, and as I would think on most of these applications, that these things might become more critical once we went up in boost and power level. So on a stock one at 7 pounds, a stock exhaust manifold and a stock intake manifold, all that stuff probably works fairly well. But if we're trying to make 200 horsepower instead of 142 or 250 or 300 or on up, these things would become more important. So as we do a turbo upgrade on it and an intake manifold upgrade and have a good intercooler, then we can do this. And because this is an early motor, it's an 84, we could also drill and tap the block for 11 millimeter studs. I need to see if ARP or anybody has the 10 millimeters. If they do, I'd like to put those in just to see what we can get away with on that application, because I don't know that I'm never going to try to make 1,000 horsepower with one of these things. After the exhaust manifolds, then we would need to start looking at, I think I'd like to start looking at a cam and valve springs and see, and valve springs may come before that, depending on where we're going to run this thing and what boost level we're going to run it at. It may be that valve springs become necessary for two reasons. One is that because of the age of the motor, we don't know how many miles these things have on them. And, springs don't have an infinite cycle life. They will go away. They will wear out. And the other reason is, if we go up in boost, we may tax the springs a little bit more. Obviously, if we start talking about cams and springs, we also have to talk about a ported head. And the 8-valve head is not great on this 2.2 liter. We know that, and everybody says the same thing. It's not good. So porting the head would definitely be beneficial. This one has this early one has a 6-bolt cast crank on it. It's got decent rods in it. But again, and the block, I'm told, is not nearly as strong as the later ones, as the common block. But, and I've in reading up on all of these things, I've had people tell me, oh, well, you can't take these over 250 horsepower, or whatever the number is. I just don't know how they come to that conclusion. I don't know if they've actually, every time they run it, they damage it at that level, or if they have one time, like we've seen in other stuff, like with the Honda, the B series and the K series and the D series. Oh, you can't run over 10 pounds of boost. Everybody said that with the LS stuff too. Oh, you can't run over 10 pounds of boost because the factory crank will break, or the factory rods will break, and the factory piston will break. And and as we know, if everything's right on the motor, that's not the case. So and it might well be. I just don't know. So that's why I want to start with, just like when I wanted to start with the Barra. On the NA version of the Barra, I picked the wrong motor, and it should say wrong motor too, instead of just wrong cam. That we picked the wrong one, but that was done on purpose. We want to see what that lowest form of the Barra will do. Same reason that we also picked an 05 4200 Amera Barra, because that's supposed to not be as good, even though it has I guess technically it has a better crankshaft. But it has the head's worse and the cam's worse and the block is supposed to be worse. And so, you got to pick the better one. Well, at what point do you have to pick that? I mean, if your goal is to make 1,000 horsepower and you can make 1,000 horsepower with that one, you've succeeded. And besides, if we get to a point on any of these motors with this Dodge or the Barra or the Mare Barra or anything else, if we get to a point where we've made lots and lots of power, and one is better than that, we should theoretically then be able to make more power, right? So that's kind of why I'm going down this road. I'm not picking it for, and this is a hard thing for a lot of guys to understand. I'm not picking it because it's the ultimate one. I'm picking it specifically because it's not, and that's what we do with a lot of testing. I get these comments all the time when I post something about, here's a big block where we did this and this and this, and it made this. And then I get comments about, oh, well, my big block made 50 more horsepower than that. That's fantastic. But this wasn't done as a competition against your big block or your ability. It was done to show you what happens when you do this and this and this. And the same thing with this Dodge motor, that, yes, we can get a common block and put a 4-valve deal on it. We could just put an SRT4 motor in it, or the PT Cruiser, any of those things, and upgrade it, make it better. That's not why I do these. I do these for the guys that have these and can know what each one of these things do, and maybe which way they would want to spend their money and what makes sense and what doesn't. I know with these Dodges, a lot of times the problem in the past was tuning. I mean, if you don't have good fuel in it and you don't know exactly what the timing is and you have too much, it's going to break. And you can't blame that on a cast piston or a hyper-eutectic piston or having it be non-intercooled or any of that. It's really easy to break a motor with too much timing. It's a little bit harder to break it with not enough fuel, but you can also do that. So if you don't have enough fuel pump, if you don't have the right, if you're not controlling the air, you're not controlling the pulse with the injector, you put a computer that was tuned But what does that mean? It doesn't mean the same thing as a standalone, where we make sure that if we want the air fuel to be 11.0, that it is 11.0 everywhere through the range. It's safe during the load in. Its air fuel is 11.0 from 2,400 RPM all the way out to 6,400 RPM. So we know that that air fuel is safe. And then we put a timing curve in that we know is safe and it doesn't hurt itself. If you put some sort of pre-programmed computer in there, and when you whack it and the boost goes up, oh, look, there was 30 degrees of timing right here. It doesn't matter that it came back down to where you would actually want it in the rest of the curve. But at the initial onset, if you had too much timing in it, it's going to rattle itself and kill itself. And this would be especially the case of a non-intercooled deal. So I think a lot of this stuff may have been tune issue and fuel issues, but we'll see. And that's why I'm excited about testing this. I know that a lot of this stuff has been done. Guys have tested, they've tested different turbos, they've tested different downpipes, they've tested distant intake manifolds and stuff. Although I can't find any really good testing on YouTube or in any of my searches on where they did like step-by-step stuff. There's one that I found on a 600 where a guy he didn't dyno test it, but at least he took it to the track and showed, okay, here are the modifications that I made, and here was the change in the ET in mile an hour. That's good stuff too. I love that. That's to me, that's the same as dyno testing. It's not quite as repeatable, I don't think, but it shows exactly what's happening. Okay, I did this, I turned the boost up this much, and the ET dropped by this, and the mile an hour went up by this much. And so you go, okay, well, we know what now it would be nice to have that and to have the power change on a chassis dyno or whatever, so you could correlate the two. That's what I like to do. That would be my ideal situation is run it on a chassis dyno and see what it does, and then take it to the track and go, okay, look, we picked up 40 horsepower, and 40 horsepower in this car at this weight turned out to be this kind of drop in ET. Some of that could be traction limited or driver limited, all kinds of things. But the mile an hour will tell you, if you added 40 horsepower and you picked up 7 or 8 miles an hour, you go, okay, look, that's really there. That kind of power is actually there. So that would kind of be cool to be able to see a dual correlation like that. That would be awesome. When we run something on the engine dyno, we'll just be able to see the power, but that'll also be good information. And with all the intercooling stuff, we'll be able to see, charge temperature differences, which will be awesome. Especially, and this thing is going to be really happy once we put, if we combine E85 and then ice water and an air-to-water intercooler, I think it's really going to kind of be in its happy place. So that is my list of, we got 13 or 14 things. That's my list of scheduled or desired tests that I want to run with it. It doesn't always run that smoothly. And what happens more often than not is while I'm there, we will find other things that we might want to test. Like I didn't mention nitrous there, and we might want to try nitrous. Because it's non-intercooled, we also might want to try water meth, and I'll write that down. Water meth and possibly NOS. So because we know nitrous is going to do what nitrous does. If we add a 50 shot, it's going to add 50 horsepower, and that's always good. And we could see what the change in charge temperature is. Now, the nice thing about adding like a 50 shot to that motor is, that's like a 30%, or that's like a 33% increase in power. And so relatively speaking, we might see a fairly sizable drop in charge temperature on a non-intercooled application on that. Whereas if we added that same amount of nitrous to an 800 horsepower turbo motor, it's much less of a percentage. So when I did the testing on using nitrous as the intercooler, there just wasn't enough nitrous compared to the airflow. But on this little motor, if we added, say, a 50 shot, we might actually see some decent changes. And as long as we had the timing right and we had enough octane in it, which if I was going to add nitrous to a non-intercooled turbo motor, I would definitely do that. And as long as we had that, I think we could see a more sizable change in charge temperature. I still don't think it would do what a good intercooler does, which we would expect somewhere near 100-degree drop, and even more on a good air to water, especially with ice water. We may see, you know, considerably more than that, especially at high boost levels. It's really easy to get big charge temperature changes when you're talking about 300 or 350 degrees of air coming out of the turbo. Then it's pretty easy to knock that back down. You could get, you know, I've seen intercoolers drop it by 200 degrees or more, and especially with ice water, it wouldn't. We've run, when we were running at Bonneville at 17 pounds, we had 58-degree charge temperatures going into the motor because our, you know, the transfer medium was 32 degrees. So it's kind of nice. It works very well. So those are the proposed tests for the 2.2 liter Dodge. And I have to get, the first thing I have to do is get bolts for it so that I can actually bolt it to the engine stand so that I can then hook a starter up and hook the battery up to the starter and then crank the thing over so that I can make sure that it even spins and that we can do a compression test on it. So that's my first deal. So I had somebody send me over the bolt sizes for the bell housing bolts, the thread and the pitch. And then I think I just need to get the right length for my engine stand, and then I can take this thing out of the truck and put it on the engine stand that I brought, and then we can wire it up and you know, crank it over, which would be good. Before I do that, obviously, I will turn it over by hand just to make sure that it works. And then that will be the start of all of this process. And then I just need to go down on my next trip down to West Tech, which will be fairly soon. I just need to get the bell housing for it out of a 2.2 NA Dodge Dakota, and away we go. Should be cool. So let me know what you guys think. What about other tests that you guys would like to see? And let me know what you guys are thinking. What did I miss and what should I try? And nobody say put a flat crank in it. Richard, thanks for being with us. Do you think going LF3 CNC ported GM heads on a 408 stroker will leave a lot of power on the table over ported cathedral port heads? No, I think you can make power with both of those. They'll just make it at different RPMs. The rec port is going to lose power down low compared to a ported cathedral port, but you can make lots of power with either one of those. I put down 356 horsepower and 389 foot-pounds. A Dynojet with a stock 85 T1 bottom end, small head bolts, rods, cast crank, and all. Drag raced it a bunch. My GLH Omni. Just surface the head and give it a fresh gasket. Thanks, Kyle. That's good. See, that's good information. See, when it's done right. Now, Kyle, what ECU were you using when you did that? I still, Tim, I still like the guys who O-ring the streetcar engines. Yeah, if you're kicking an MLS gasket out, something is going on, and an O-ring is not the thing that you want to use to cure that problem. Oh, we're bringing up the Wraith again. Here goes the Charlie Sheen discussion. Yeah, nitrous with an automatic is a really good idea to get the turbo spooled up. I'm not worried about cast cranks at all. I've never broke a cast crank. Look at the LS stuff. Really should intercool it. That's what killed 98% of them. Limited safety and turbo heat crack the heads. Why is nitrous mandatory? Okay. I don't want to run over my cast crank. No, that would be bad. If it blows it out the bottom, that would be bad. Compound turbo, big bang on the 2.2. You won't need a compound turbo to do a big bang on the 2.2. I like the Rampage trucks too, and I like the guys that have done turbo stuff on those. Those are awesome. And the Rampage trucks are actually really good for Bonneville too. They're pretty swoopy. Yeah, Kevin had the MS4 had twin T25s. Yeah, so it had twin small turbos on it. Compounds on a Barra. Yep, that would work. The LS block supports the crank. Small block Chevy. Cast cranks break. I've never broken a small block Chevy crank either. Yeah, you can. The factory ones are Evan. The factory ones are 2.5, so you can all get that motor. A big stall can help get rid of turbo lag. Will a Coyote Gen 1 mount to a 4R70W 4x4 mod bell housing? I'm the wrong guy to ask about that. Best 80s indie flick ever. Here goes Charlie Sheen. Anyone ever tried to see how strong the LSA blower crank is? It's a forging. Forge crank is 2 times stronger than cast. The Coyote and Modular do have the same bell housing. We've run both of those on the dyno at West Tech. Please do a neon head on it. If we did do a 4-valve deal on it, it would be way into the future. I kind of want to see where the 8-valve is going to go. Although, again, this early motor is probably not going to go to 400, 500, 600 horsepower. I don't think it's going to go there. Have you ever run a roots blower on a small book Chevy cast crank and the snout stop? I've never snapped the snout off. I have seen that though. Yeah, the Ford V10 uses the modular Ford pattern also. Let's go back and take a look at some of these comments back here. The 2.2 liter Mopar engines are not still plentiful. I hardly see any. This is the only one I've seen. Lots of the ones I see all the time are the turbo PT Cruiser engines. Those are in the wrecking yards a lot. The Big Bang K24 is still going to happen. .45 psi on an air-to-air, and you were running 120-degree charge temperatures. It's at 45 psi. It's got to be a lot more than 300 coming out of the turbo, especially on a 105-degree day. You could put an M90 on one of these. Somebody mentioned that in one of the comments. I think on a hot day, an air-to-air intercooler does nothing. It still helps. It still helps a lot. If the air temperature coming out of the turbo is 300, even if the day is 100 degrees, that's still a big change in transfer medium. Richard, I have an 89 Spirit 2.5 turbo motor in the garage with a stage 5 tune. Ooh, send me an email. I can send you information. I almost bought one of the Spirits not long ago. On the draw through, how about running out on gas, E85 and methanol to compare air intake temps? The problem is injecting those, if you measure the air intake temperature in the manifold, it's not going to change at all because the injectors are down by the head. We can convert this from a draw through to a blow through. You just have to change a few things around. Okay, I'm back down here. Hey, Richard, did you ever get to see the Ford V10 double overhead cam engine? I didn't get to see that. I mean, I saw pictures of it, but I never saw it in person. Yeah, the Mazda Millennia superchargers are good for small displacement motors. My out of turbo temps is 360. After the cooler, it's 118 on a 90-degree day. Yeah, the Miller Cycle engine, that Mazda Millennia, the Miller Cycle deal is pretty interesting in what they're doing to cam timing. Have you had a chance to try any of the interchiller types of systems? I haven't yet. Will you do a blow through versus draw through? I will, but it's only a throttle body though. It's not a carburetor, so I don't think we're going to see a big difference. The Nissan TB48, I'm not even familiar with that motor. Someone did offer up a 3-liter RB motor to test, so that might be something way off in the future. The problem with some of these motors, especially some of these other guys' motors that come from another country, is that, you know, it's if we hurt something, then it's hard to get parts for and make it fit. Not that some of these other things haven't taken an awful long time. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to take a trip to Saudi Arabia to find that motor. Daniel, that's a good question. I want to test that. I want to do it with an EFI motor, a fuel cooler. I think I want to, first of all, measure the temperature of the fuel on an EFI motor, because if you're running 58 pounds of fuel pressure, I'd like to see what that does to the fuel temperature. And then I'd like to see how much a fuel cooler would help. And I think it would help more on pump gas than it would on E85, because I think that we're getting a lot of cooling from the E85 already. And I don't think we'd see as much, but I think on pump gas, like on 91, I think we might see some power. The 2.2 that I have is a 1984 T1, the best Dodge motor ever made. I sent on my Instagram post. If you guys don't follow me on Instagram, you should make sure that you do. So like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and then follow me on Instagram and Facebook. But I made a comment about Dulcich that I said that I got a Dodge 2.2 turbo motor, that it's the best motor that Dodge ever made. I don't have any plans to do an Ecotech. I think it's a good motor, and guys have done a lot of stuff with it, but I haven't ever run any. What would you consider the horsepower danger zone for a leaf sprung car? For some leaf spring cars, I would think 100 horsepower would be too much. And it depends a lot on who the driver is and how a lot of the other stuff is going on that car. I mean, if it's a leaf spring car that's a dedicated drag race car and it's set up by a guy that knows what he's doing and he's set up the suspension correctly, then the level is very high. If it's an average thing that street car that you're trying to put 1,000 horsepower in, it's probably way beyond the limit already. Yeah, the 2.2 turbos definitely go to drag week. I think that would be interesting. I'm building a G-body LS swap Monte Carlo. I have an LQ4 with 862 heads. What cam would you? There's lots of cams that will get you to 400 horsepower. The sloppy stage 2 probably would get you there. The comp 459 or 469 cam would get you there also. I do plan on doing a Jeep. I would love to have a Kai class car. As a matter of fact, when I wrote a book on B segment cars, which were the small Toyota Yaris and the Scions and Hondas and Honda Fit and stuff. But originally what I wanted to do was I wanted to do a book on Kai class cars because I think that those are awesome. But there just wasn't enough interest in the people that I was talking to. The people from CarTech or SA Designs didn't even know what it was. So there was no chance that was going to happen. But I like those little cars. I'd love to have one. When you do a break-in, you can keep it in for a few hundred miles. It would be fine. Carlos, that's what I don't know. And that's another thing I would like to try. I almost wish I had a naturally aspirated. Carlos is asking, is the 2.2 NA Dodge motor that would have also been in the Omnis and Chargers and stuff, is that motor any good to turbocharge? Is it not worthy because it's not one of the turbo motors? But I think that it is a lot like the Barra is, and any motor is good to turbocharge. But I just don't know what those limits are. I'd like to try that, and I almost wish that I had a naturally aspirated Omni GLH, not even a GLHT, to start out with, and then you could obviously swap a turbo motor into there. Okay, Admiral, I need some cam advice. I've got a low compression motor out of a Mark 8. I've got the cams from both it and the Cobra. This Mark 8 motor is 8.5 to 1 compression. Which cam should I go with? I don't know what the difference between those two cams are. I would assume that the Cobra cams are better. The other ones are going to probably be designed more for torque production than the Cobras are. So it's going to depend more on where you want your power output. Are you still using the Lincoln manifold, the intake manifold? The Pontiac 301 didn't feed off just one bank of the exhaust. It fed off both. It had a Y pipe. Going to be tough finding one with a good head, so that'll be something to check. Okay, Admiral. Then I would go with the bigger cams. Yeah, I agree, Mike. A standalone for the 2.2 is definitely the way to go, because I think that guys were fooling around. They were kind of at the mercy of these computers back in the day, where if you took the Dodge upgrade, the stage 1 or stage 2 upgrades that they sold for these, you could put those in and those would work, but they would only work if you had enough octane. So they didn't ever tell you like how much timing they added. Did they add 2 degrees? They had 4 degrees? They had 8 degrees? Where was it from the factory? Triple staying man. So change the timing belt on the 2.2 before I run it. They like to break. Okay. I noticed that the timing belt cover it got heated up from the fire, and it's warped a little bit. So we might take that off anyway. I was planning on doing some, but I want to find out if it's all the holes are there. And even if it's not, we can rebuild it, whatever needs to happen ultimately. But I want to find out before we try to dyno it. And we'll do kind of normal maintenance. So I'll put, plugs and cap and rotor and wire and that stuff on it, and maybe a timing belt. The other thing that I noticed today while I was out taking a picture of the thumbnail that I'm going to put up for this, and it didn't go through my email quick enough for me to put it up here, but I noticed that the water pump has a crack in it and that they JB welded it. So people do what they do. You got to make sure that it's not going to leak. And if all you have is JB weld, so I probably will replacing that housing. I don't know if the water pump comes with that housing or if the housing's separate. So I'll either have to have that welded or I'll have to, fix it. Kyle, that's good information. And I looked for this for hours last night. I wanted to find out what a stock motor dynoed at. An 85 T1, 125 dyno jet, 125 wheel horsepower. That seems like a lot for 142 horsepower. Oh, at 85, so that's going to be 146. That seems like a lot, because I saw some runs made by a T2 and it was like 135 or 140. So I was thinking T1 would be closer to 100 horsepower, but if yours did it, that's good. And that's what I was looking for last night when I wanted to find out. I thought that I would go online and that there would be hundreds of these T1 turbo deals that guys had run, because I've seen where, car clubs of these 2.2 guys, they would all go to some dyno facility and they'd have a dyno day and they'd all be running them. And there'd be everything from stock ones to modified ones. And some guy would be the big guy because he has the full wazoo deal with a ported head and a cam and the giant size turbo and all that. And his makes 350 or 400 or whatever the number is. But I wanted to see the stock ones. Like, I don't care about the modified ones. I just wanted to see what a stock one started out as. And so we would know kind of where they are, but that's good information. JB Weldon tin hat, nice. Oh, Demon Tech, they're non-interference motors, like I think that the weren't the Pinto motors like that too? Chad's in the house. What's up? I agree with you, Chad. I have wanted a GLH forever. I mean, ideally it would be a GLHS, but I want a GLH to do all of this testing with, and it's cool. But you mean except not more than a Honda VX though, right? Because there's nothing more than that. So everybody say hi to Chad. It's not just Chad, it's the Chad. And I salute the person whoever did this. Since it was a 600 and it looked like all stock, I'm assuming it wasn't somebody that was modifying it. But I salute the fact that somebody did, JB Weld on it. Yes, VX for the win, definitely. Chad, what movie did you see? Should you limit the oil pressure to the turbo? Not the oil pressure, the oil flow maybe. And on some of them you do, and some of them you don't. Yeah, bank shifts in the house. Mr. C. Oh, Black Widow, was it any good? B plus, okay. It's Scarlett Johansson, so I'll definitely see it. And I like all the Marvel stuff. I went to see, while I was down at West Tech, I went to see a late movie because I'm working until late. But I went to see Quiet Place 2, which I thought was great. I love that. It's exactly the kind of movie that I want to see. And I like all of the people in it. I thought that they did a great job. I like Emily Blunt, and I like her husband, and I like the young girl that is kind of the star of the movie. She did a great job. And it's a monster movie. There are good guys and there are bad guys. Well, Chad, you've seen the guys at Drag Week and at probably Rocky Mountain. Some of those guys are running nines with those things, so they're over 500 at the tire on some of these. So there's a lot of power, if you go ported head and cam and all that stuff. SoCal Hoopty Turbo Club, nice. I like that. If you were to build a tow rig, not particularly heavy loads, but still a loaded truck, what LS would you start with? I would start with a 6-liter truck motor. How far have you pushed a stock-headed 2.3 Lima? The only 2.3 I've done stuff with is the SVO motor, and we were like at 420 or 430 at the tire. Get a GLHS cheap enough at the moment. I don't know where you find a cheap one. Show me one, or send me an email where we can find some that are for sale. They're hard to find. The LQ4, LQ9 didn't come with 243 heads. They came with 317 heads, and they flow fairly well. They have a big chamber on them, so that they're not nearly as good as a 243 799 head, but you can make good power with them. We have not got the 3800 up and running yet, but when I go back down, that one is the priority. Let's see, Kyle, at the end of my 85 T1, stock head, cam, intake, bottom end, turbo, 65 millimeter throttle body, 3-inch inlet to the turbo, to the compressor, no exhaust, methanol before the compressor, and all the boost it could take, it would touch 260 wheel horsepower. So was that non-intercooled, Kyle? Were you just using meth before the turbo for the cooling? Shouldn't a 2.2 Dodge have the guts to hang with a 2.3 SVO? They do. They have versions that make 225, so that version actually works fairly well. These early non-intercooled ones were like non-intercooled 2.3 turbo motors that Ford offered, and they're not great. We are going to do a twin charge motor on the 3800. 430 wheel horsepower is a lot from SVO. It was a lot. It was a lot of boost. And it was us with the T-Bird air-to-air intercooler. We blew it off a couple of times, had it super clamped on, and it was with me blowing, using the air nozzle from the shop to blow air through the core while we were making the runs. And I even squirted it with water before we did that to cool it off. And, you know, so we were cheating a little bit. Has anyone ever put a 16 valve VW head on there? No, I think the one that they put on is the neon head. The 85.5 is more power than the T3 2.2. I thought that the 85.5 was 200. Was it 205 horsepower or 210? Is there a way to put a Maserati head on it? You could, but it's it would be better to put that on the later block. But the Maserati heads is not great either, and it's really hard to find. I've done a lot of testing with the Datsun 240, 260, 280 inline 6 cylinders, but not with turbos though. Yep, the Chad. Yeah, if you can, there are guys that make a lot of power from any of these engine families. If you just put your mind to it and say, hey, look, I'm gonna fix all of the issues that happen along the way as I find out what the next thing is. Yeah, they didn't. The SVO was not as high as it wasn't as high as the factory rated 225 horse 5-liter. I was looking up the Super 60 package also, but they recommend that for the later blocks. I just like it because it says turbo on the valve cover. so that it must be good. All right, guys. Chad, thanks for showing up, and everybody else, guys. I'm glad you guys are here. As always, I got to get going. Thank you guys for showing up. I will be loading more videos up, and hopefully get this. Got to do some more cleaning and get the bolts for this 2.2 liter so I can put it up on the engine stand. I'm excited about cranking this thing over and making sure that it works. I need to crank it over by hand. I should probably I'm just going to go out there and take the plugs out of it and then use a ratchet to make sure that it spins, it's not frozen up. I'm hoping that it's not. And then while I have it on the stand, I can take off all of the crusty bits from the fire and kind of see what's there. I can also finish cleaning off all the stuff. So this motor, unlike most of the ones that I show up with to see my buddy Steve Brule, this one will actually be presentable and not drop stuff all over the place. So it will be good. Thanks you guys for showing up. Chad, thanks for being here. Narcoleptic Customs, thank you very much. Thank you guys all. I will see you later. Do, 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 do.